They called me a professional failure at a wedding out loud, into a microphone. They laughed. I didn't. My name is Claire Morrison, and the night my family decided out loud who I was allowed to be happened at my cousin's wedding. The venue was flawless. White roses draped the ballroom walls, crystal chandeliers scattering light across polished marble floors. A string quartet played softly near the stage, and servers moved like clockwork with trays of champagne. It was the kind of wedding people describe as tasteful, controlled, perfect. I stood near the back of the room in a navy dress I'd owned for years, holding a glass I hadn't touched. I already knew my role. I always did. During the speeches, my uncle tapped the microphone, smiling wide. He talked about family pride, tradition, and real success. Then he laughed, waved his hand in my direction, and said, "Well, not everyone figures it out. Claire's still exploring her options." A pause, then laughter. Someone at my table added, "She's our family's professional failure, but hey, someone has to be brave enough to try and fail, right?" More laughter. Louder this time. My mother didn't look at me. She adjusted her napkin. My father stared into his wine. No one interrupted. No one corrected it. The room accepted the story as truth because it was easier that way. I smiled. Just enough to be polite. Inside, something settled. Not anger. Not embarrassment. Clarity. They thought they knew exactly where my life had landed. They thought silence meant defeat, that a lack of explanation meant a lack of achievement. To them, success only existed if it looked familiar: job titles they could pronounce, companies they recognized, applause they could witness firsthand. They had no idea why I wasn't reacting. They had no idea what was already in motion. And standing there, listening to them laugh, I realized something quietly important. This would be the last time I let my family define me in public without consequence. My family didn't decide I was a failure overnight. They trained me into that role slowly, patiently, over years of small comments and carefully placed comparisons. Growing up, success in our house followed a narrow script. You went to the right school, chose a career people recognized instantly, and collected titles that sounded impressive at dinner parties. My older brother followed that path perfectly: business degree, corporate ladder, predictable promotions. My cousins became lawyers, consultants, people whose jobs could be summarized in one sentence and approved with a nod. I didn't. I was curious in ways they didn't understand. I asked questions that didn't lead to clean answers. I changed directions when something stopped making sense. When I graduated, I didn't chase a corner office. I chased problem systems that were inefficient, ideas that could scale quietly, industries that rewarded patience more than applause. To my family, that looked like drifting. At every holiday, someone asked, "So, what exactly do you do now, Claire?" Not out of interest, but evaluation. When I explained, their eyes glazed over halfway through. Too abstract, too unfamiliar, too easy to dismiss. When my first company didn't make headlines, they called it a phase. When I walked away from a comfortable job to build something of my own, they called it irresponsible. When I stopped correcting them, they took that as confirmation. Silence became their proof. They told each other stories about me without realizing I could hear them. Claire's still figuring things out. Claire never sticks with one thing. Claire's smart but not practical. Each label stuck, not because it was true, but because it was convenient. I learned to stop defending myself. Every explanation sounded like an excuse to people who'd already made up their minds. So I focused elsewhere: long nights, quiet partnerships, risks taken without applause. I learned how to operate without validation. What my family never noticed was how deliberate my choices were. The planning, the patience, the way every detour was actually a step closer to something larger. By the time they were laughing at that wedding, they weren't reacting to who I was. They were reacting to the version of me they'd built years ago and never bothered to update. Once the label is assigned, people grow comfortable using it. That night at the wedding, my family wore their assumptions like armor. As the reception moved on, the jokes didn't stop, they evolved. They became bolder, sharper, delivered with the confidence of people who believed the verdict was already final. At my table, conversations drifted effortlessly back to careers, bonuses, and promotions. Every success story circled the room like a trophy being passed hand to hand. Someone leaned in and asked, "So, Claire, are you still working on that project thing?" Another chimed in before I could answer. "She's allergic to normal jobs." Laughter again. They spoke freely because they thought there was nothing at stake. To them, I had no influence, no leverage, no relevance beyond being a harmless example of what not to do. I wasn't competition. I wasn't a threat. I was safe to mock. What fascinated me wasn't the cruelty, it was the certainty. They weren't guessing. They weren't probing. They knew, or at least believed they did. Their confidence was built on outdated information and a complete absence of curiosity. Across the room, I watched my parents accept compliments on raising such successful children, never once glancing in my direction. They'd learned how to compartmentalize me family, but not a reflection of them. I was the exception that proved the rule. I realized then how powerful assumptions can be when no one challenges them. They free people from asking questions. They allow judgment without effort. And they create a strange kind of bravery, the kind that only exists when you believe the person in front of you has nothing to take from you. I didn't interrupt. I didn't clarify. I didn't defend myself. Instead, I observed. I noticed the way people spoke around me instead of to me. The way confidence replaced kindness once they believed I had nothing they needed. The way their laughter sounded less like humor and more like relief. They thought they were standing on solid ground. They had no idea it was built on assumptions that were about to collapse. The shift didn't announce itself loudly. It never does. At first, it was just a ripple, phones lighting up across the room, quick glances downward, polite apologies as people checked notifications they pretended weren't important. The music kept playing. Glasses kept clinking. Laughter carried on, slightly thinner than before. Someone near the bar whispered, "Is that real?" Another replied, "Probably nothing. Weddings make everything feel dramatic." I felt my own phone vibrate in my hand. Once. Then again. I didn't look at it right away. Across the room, I caught fragments of conversation drifting through the noise. Wall Street Journal. Profile. Tonight? The words floated past me like sparks that refused to catch, ignored, dismissed, smothered by the assumption that whatever it was, it couldn't possibly involve me. My aunt waved her hand dismissively when someone mentioned it at her table. "Oh please," she said. "That kind of thing doesn't just happen." I finally glanced down. One new message. From a number I recognized instantly. Short, precise. "We're here. Editor wants to speak with you before the piece goes live." My pulse stayed steady. This wasn't news to me, it was timing. Carefully arranged, thoroughly vetted timing. I slipped my phone back into my clutch without a word. Around me, the room kept moving forward, unaware it was walking toward a wall. The confidence hadn't faded yet. My family continued talking, laughing, assuming the night belonged to them. They mistook my calm for irrelevance. They mistook my silence for absence. What they didn't realize was that attention doesn't always enter a room through the front door. Sometimes it waits until everyone is comfortable, until assumptions are fully formed, until there's no room left to deny what's about to be seen. And when it arrives, it doesn't ask permission. It simply takes notice. And that night, for the first time, it wasn't them being noticed. The moment arrived not with drama, but with certainty. I was halfway through a polite conversation about honeymoon destinations, when the ballroom doors opened again quietly, this time, no announcement. No music cue. Just two people stepping in with the unmistakable focus of professionals who already knew where they were going. They didn't scan the room. They walked straight toward me. The woman introduced herself first, extending a hand with practiced ease. "Claire Morrison. I'm Elaine Porter, senior editor at the Wall Street Journal. This is Mark Feldman, our markets correspondent." The words landed like a dropped glass. Conversations around us slowed, then stopped. Chairs scraped softly. Someone behind me inhaled sharply. I felt eyes turn, curiosity snapping into attention. Elaine smiled, calm but direct. "I apologize for interrupting your evening. We tried reaching you earlier. The piece is scheduled to go live in less than an hour." My uncle's face drained of color. I nodded once. "Of course," she continued, her voice carrying just far enough. We're finalizing our coverage on Helix Ridge, specifically the acquisition that closed this morning. Given your role, we wanted to confirm a few details in person. Silence. Not the awkward kind. The stunned kind. My mother's head lifted slowly. My father turned in his chair. Someone whispered my name, unsure if they were allowed to say it. Elaine glanced at her notes. Co-founder. Majority stakeholder. Strategic architect behind the platform integration. She looked up at me. Is that accurate? Yes, I said. A pause. Then Mark added, almost conversationally, the valuation surprised a lot of people, just under $1.2 billion. If our sources are correct. The room stopped breathing. The phrase professional failure echoed in my head not as a wound but as a fossil. Something ancient. Irrelevant. My uncle stammered. I am sorry, did you say? Elaine turned toward him politely. We did. This will be tomorrow's lead digital feature. Print runs next week. My cousin's champagne flute slipped from her fingers and shattered against the marble floor. No one reacted. My parents were staring at me now, not smiling, not nodding, just staring, as if they were seeing me for the first time and realizing how much they'd missed by never looking closely. Elaine lowered her voice slightly. We'll need 10 minutes when you're ready. No rush. I nodded again. I'll join you shortly. As they stepped aside, the space they left behind felt enormous. Conversations didn't resume. No one laughed. No one spoke. The confidence that had filled the room earlier collapsed under the weight of undeniable fact. People who hadn't noticed me all night were suddenly aware of exactly where I stood. I didn't smile. I didn't explain. I didn't reclaim the insults or demand apologies. I simply stood there, letting the truth do what it does best when it's finally allowed into the open. It spoke for itself. The silence didn't last long. It never does when people realize they've miscalculated. It broke first in whispers, urgent, breathless, stitched together with nervous laughter. Chairs turned. Bodies angled toward me. The same relatives who had ignored me minutes earlier suddenly needed eye contact, proximity, acknowledgement. My uncle was the first to recover. Claire, he said too loudly, standing halfway out of his chair. Why didn't you ever tell us? The question landed exactly where it always does, placing responsibility on the person who was dismissed, not the ones who refused to listen. My aunt rushed in behind him, hand pressed dramatically to her chest. We always knew you were smart, she said, as if the past hour hadn't happened. We just didn't realize how big this was. Always. Knew. My mother finally stood, smoothing her dress with trembling hands. This explains so much, she said, voice unsteady but careful. You were just private. We respected that. I looked at her and realized how quickly stories can be rewritten when reputations are at risk. Across the room, my cousin was already on her phone, whispering fiercely. Yes, the Wall Street Journal is here. Yes, she's family, she hissed. Make sure you tag the right name. What they felt wasn't pride. It was exposure. Suddenly, everyone remembered a moment they'd supported me, a compliment they might have offered once. A vague memory of encouragement that couldn't be verified. The same mouths that had laughed now spoke softly, cautiously, afraid of being overheard saying the wrong thing. My father approached last. His voice was low. You should have told us, he said. Family deserves to know. I met his eyes. Family had years to ask. He flinched. The truth made people uncomfortable. Not because it was cruel but because it was accurate. They hadn't misunderstood me, they'd chosen a version of me that required no effort, no humility, no adjustment. Now, they were scrambling to contain the damage. To distance themselves from the mockery. To align publicly with success they'd rejected privately. I didn't argue. I didn't confront. I didn't correct the rewritten history forming in real time. I simply stepped away to join the journalists, leaving my family behind in a room full of mirrors they could no longer avoid. The consequences didn't arrive with shouting or slammed doors. They came quietly, the way real shifts in power usually do. In the days that followed, my phone lit up constantly. Messages framed as congratulations but written like invitations. Dinners suggested. Introductions offered. People who had laughed now wanted proximity, relevance, reassurance that they hadn't permanently misjudged me. I responded politely, briefly, selectively. What I didn't offer was access. I stopped filling in the gaps for them. I declined meetings that came with an unspoken expectation of benefit. I no longer adjusted my schedule to accommodate people who had never adjusted theirs for me. Boundaries I'd once felt guilty for even considering now felt necessary and overdue. My parents tried to return to normal, but normal had changed. Their pride felt reactive, not rooted. They wanted closeness without accountability, familiarity without reflection. I gave them respect, but not the illusion that nothing had happened. As for the rest of the family, the dynamic shifted. Conversations became careful, jokes disappeared. No one called me a failure again, not because they'd grown kinder, but because they understood the cost of being wrong in public. Their laughter had bought them certainty. My silence had bought me freedom. I didn't cut anyone off dramatically. I didn't make announcements. I simply let distance do what confrontation couldn't: clarify value, reset expectations, and reveal who was interested in me as a person rather than a position. They lost access not because I was angry, but because they'd already shown me how they treat people they believe have nothing to offer. That knowledge doesn't fade. It educates. Looking back, the most painful part of that night wasn't the laughter. It was how normal it felt to them. For years, I believed that if I just explained myself better, if I worked harder, achieved more visibly, became easier to understand, respect would follow. I see now how backwards that thinking was. Respect isn't a reward for success. It's a baseline. And anyone who withholds it until recognition arrives was never really offering it at all. What the Wall Street Journal revealed wasn't my worth. It revealed their assumptions. I didn't win that night by being publicly validated. I won because I no longer needed validation from the same people who had already decided my limits for me. Success didn't change who I was. It changed who felt entitled to speak about me. If there's one lesson I carry forward, it's this: silence can be strategic, patience can be power, and dignity doesn't require permission. The people who matter don't need proof to offer respect, and the ones who do will only respect what benefits them. I chose to build a life that spoke quietly and clearly on my behalf. And when it finally spoke loudly, I didn't need to say a word. If you've made it this far, I want to speak to you directly, not as a headline, not as a success story, but as someone who knows what it feels like to be underestimated by the people who should have believed first. If my story resonated with you, I hope you'll stand with me in one simple way: leave a comment. Tell me what you would have done in my place. Would you have spoken up sooner or stayed silent like I did? Your perspective matters more than you think. What I learned is this: don't wait for recognition to demand respect. Apply that lesson in your own life. Set boundaries before resentment builds. Stop explaining yourself to people who benefit from misunderstanding you. Build quietly if you must, but build intentionally. If stories like this help you reflect, heal, or feel less alone, please support this channel. Subscribe, like, and share your thoughts below. Your engagement keeps these conversations alive and reminds others they're not imagining the imbalance they feel.